Hi, Paul Bedford here from Retention Guru, and in this third online lesson webinar, I am going to talk about retention, recovery and re-engagement of your customers. Now, a lot's changed in the last 12 months, and while some of the content I've got is some of the traditional stuff we've been doing, I also added a section on at the end. So what I've done is I've created content here in 4 parts. In the first part, I'm going to talk about retention and attrition, how we measure it, how we report it with our clients and our customers, so we get real clarity about what's going on within the business. Then in the second part, I look at signs and signals that people are going to quit your business, what's going on within the data, what things to look for, and how you should track and measure that. Then in the third part, I start talking about re-engagement, recovery processes, things that we've been doing traditionally within businesses. Then in the fourth and final part, I've sort of just added it on, to be fair. It's a section that I recorded for an event called The Future of Fitness. It was only 10 minutes long, but it's full of content. And I just thought, rather than it just go to waste, why don't we put it here, because it fits with the content that we've got in these sessions. If you've got questions, you can submit those, or maybe we can answer them at the end. For now, let's get on with the session. For me, when I'm looking at measuring retention, I'm looking at how long people stay. I want to understand the period of time between when they join and either when they stop visiting, so their first visit and their last visit, or their first visit and when they stop paying. And both of those we tend to measure in months. Now, those of you who are familiar with the work that I've been doing over the last 15 years will be familiar with a survival curve. This survival curve, fairly straightforward. Across the bottom here, what you've got is months of membership or months since joining, and what you have up the side is the proportion of customers still members. Now, the easiest way to understand this is if this is 100% at the top, if you had 100 members, that would equate to 100 people, 1,000 members, it's 1,000 people, and so on. And what you're seeing is that from a set point, and we decide on that when we're doing our analysis, usually 2 years back, sometimes 3, since joining, people are cancelling, and they're cancelling on a regular basis. And so what we see is this gentle curve sloping down over the first 12 months, continuing over the second 12 months and into the third year. Now, when we measure retention, we're measuring this length of time between when they started, which would be 0, and when they quit. And the line just represents when they quit. Now, what you can see, hopefully, in this graph is really poor retention. This is an operator that I've worked with in the past, and I could see really early on that they had a problem with their retention when I looked at their data. Funnily enough, they rang me up and said, Paul, we've got a retention problem. I said, well, let's have a look at your data. We ran a graph and this is what we saw. And there were a couple of things we noticed about this. The first thing is, 40% of their customers had gone within the first 2 months. Now, that could be for a number of reasons. It could be a sales campaign that just drove low value customers. So these are customers who'd sign up but wouldn't stay for very long. It could be the onboarding process. It could be a lack of delivery on the part of the operator, but it's still not a good number. And it's an awful lot of work to actually have to deal with if you're not going to keep those customers for very long. The other thing you'll notice about this particular curve is there's a cliff here, again, round about 13 months. And so I said to them, were they selling 13 months for the price of 12 memberships? And they said, yeah, that was fairly common for them. And that's reflected in those figures. So we use this type of analysis to measure retention, and we measure retention in months. Now, what you can see here is the different type of membership contracts from a particular operator. And you can see that the blue line are the month by month single month agreements. So this is when people sign up and they're easy in, easy out. And as you can see in this example, it's easy in and very easy out because, well, what's that? 80% of the people who bought those types of contracts were gone within 2 months. They also had a 4-month agreement, and you can see that in the green line. And their 12-month agreement was a month-by-month payment, but a minimum of 12 months. And you can see that that's a pretty decent line for this type of operator. You can also notice that, yes, they did lose some customers. They lost about 20%, but their renewal rate into the second year here was 80%. That is a very, very good figure for a business. So retention is measured in months. It's the currency we tend to use as an industry, and it's the way in which we tend to communicate our results internally and to our boards and to our investors. Now, attrition is a measure of how many people quit. And if we're measuring attrition, what we're going to look to see is we're going to look to try and see if, how many people quit perhaps this week, this month, this quarter, this year. Now, I'm going to suggest to you there are two measures we can use for attrition. One is just a head count, and I call that the attrition number. What's the actual number of people that we've lost this month? And in this example, each one of those icons represents 10 people. The business has lost 70 people this month. Now, I think it's important that we do present these figures to our staff in these types of numbers. I think it's much more impactful if I'm sitting down with a team of people and I'm saying to them, we lost 70 people this month, than giving them some sort of percentage. In fact, I don't recommend measuring attrition as a percentage at all. And those of you who've worked with me will have seen me bang on about that for a number of years. So attrition should be represented for me as the number of people. Now, it's easy to do that at the club level, and it's easy to do that at the business level of the whole company. We could say this month as a business, we've lost 500 people, we've lost 350 people. At the site level, we can also report it. But if we want to make comparisons between sites, then we need to use a slightly different measure. We need to use the attrition rate. Now, attrition rate is a measure of the number of people cancelling per month over a 12-month period. And you only take into account the people who've cancelled. You don't measure people who are still members because it will really confuse you in your figures. Now, when we do the attrition rate calculation, what we're able to do is, because we use the same method on every size club, as it's being reported against 1,000 members, we can compare different clubs of different sizes. And I'll show you a slide of that in just a second. So attrition is a measure of people. How many people have gone? So if retention is a measure in months and attrition is measured in people, you can see that retention is not the opposite of attrition, which is something I often hear people saying. I hear people standing on the stage and saying, we've measured our attrition and it's this percentage, and therefore our retention is the opposite to our attrition percentage. So if our attrition percentage is 30, they're suggesting their retention is 70. I'm going to say this. If they're reporting their attrition as a percentage, they have no idea what's going on in their business, and they should stop doing that straight away, because I don't think it's helpful in any way. So being clear about what you're measuring is really important. Therefore, when you go and present your data to your board, to your staff, to your managers, you need to be clear about what type of information you're telling which type of staff. Because I don't think you should tell the same thing to everybody. The numbers stay the same, but the way you present it will change. So if we look at attrition here, we could look at it in terms of net gain or loss, and we could do that, as I've already suggested, by site or by the company level. So we could say to the teams, this month we joined 40, but we lost 70. Therefore, the difference, we're down 30. I don't think there's a member of staff that doesn't understand what you're trying to present here. Now, if you're doing this at the board level, or you're doing it with, and I'm just trying to find the slide, you're doing it with teams that are involved in the finance side, I'd certainly present what that means to us as a business in terms of the finance. What's the revenue loss? What's the revenue gain? However, I don't tend to focus on that if I'm working with front of house staff, fitness teams, those people who are delivering frontline. So I tend to keep the financial figures related to this just to the board or the senior management team. So let me just go back a second. So net gain, net loss, really easy to understand. If you then work out your attrition rate, what you'll see here is, and I've got an example, this is real data from a 10 club operator. I've renamed the clubs into US cities because I was showing this in the States a little while ago. And what you can see here are these columns, these bars. And at the end of each bar, there's a figure. So Boston is 75.2, which says to me, Boston is losing 75 customers per 1,000 customers per month. Now, if Boston is a 5,000 member club, then I just multiply the 75 by 5. If Chicago's a 3,000 member club, I multiply it by 3. If it's less than 1,000, I multiply it by the decimal version of 1,000. So Dallas is only losing 38 customers per 1,000 per month. In fact, the rate of loss, and you might need to move your icon around a little bit here, but the rate of loss, Dallas loses half as many customers as Boston does. So you can, with an attrition rate, you can compare what's going on within a business by the size of the facility. So if you've got facilities of different sizes, you can make comparisons between your smaller sites, your larger sites, sites that are further away, by all of those variables. We can also split this by any other electronic variable that you've collected. So we could just do it by site, but we could also do it by age, by gender, by membership type. And you could therefore see what's having an impact on attrition. And maybe it's the type of membership you're selling. Maybe it's the type of customer you're selling to. Maybe it's their age. All those variables could be taken into account. So when you're looking at an attrition rate like this, anything that is a lower number is a good number. That means less people are cancelling. Anything that's a higher number is a bad number. So an organisation like this, their average is 54 customers per 1,000 per month. Anything below that dashed red line are sites that are performing better than the average. Anything to the right of the red line are the sites that are performing worse than the average. Now, what we need to be mindful of here is when you do start doing these calculations, when these lines start to change and if everything starts to move towards the left or the good side, then what we'll see is an overall average rate come down. So we need to be mindful of that in our reporting as well. So attrition can be measured in two ways. It can be measured as an absolute figure of people, or it can be measured as a rate. But if you're measuring it as a percentage, I wouldn't bother. So who's responsible for tackling attrition? My argument to this, or my position on this would be everybody is. I get frustrated when I see operators focusing all the responsibility for the attrition or management of attrition with the fitness team, when customers are joining and some aren't ever using the gym or the fitness areas. They're using the studio, they're using the pools, they have a more general membership, and therefore everybody's responsible for this. Because if the attrition is caused by poor service, but that poor service is through front of house, there's very little the fitness team could do to improve their attrition rate if it's actually someone else that's causing the problem. So everybody's responsible for tackling attrition. And we need to think about the systems that we use, the combination of our customer service, our customer journeys, and our customer experience, and those three different elements and how they work together. So one of the points I said I would make in today's session was about what to say during the joining process to reduce the cancelled at the bank notifications. Well, there's been a lot of research done on what's called priming, seeding, and persuasion. This is about telling people what's going to happen in the future before it actually happens. Now, a retention guru, when we're working with our clients, we look at what we call the core journey layout. And the core journey layout has these segments. Now here they're fairly evenly distributed just for graphical representation, but it could actually be that the immersion and engagement phase are very close together. The segmentation and the ascension could be close together as well. Then there could be a long period of maintenance. Then we start to lose them in terms of visits or loyalty, and we need to start trying to recover them. And sometimes if we actually lose them, we have to go into a re-engagement program. So there's this whole series of things we need to think about. And sometimes thinking about them in advance, thinking about what's going to happen in the future, is a better way of dealing with rather than trying to deal with it when it actually happens. So some of the digital sequences we produce for operators now, and this is a prompting sequence for visits that we use, and it's a representation of the types of things we know have an impact on different areas of the business. So we know if they book an appointment, they're 10% more likely to turn up in the following week. We know if they attend a gym induction, not only are they 50% more likely to get spoken to because they'll speak to the customers, they'll speak to the staff and the staff will speak to the customers, but we also know that can give us up to 7 months extra membership. So we know certain things have an impact on other things and those things prompt each other. Now with that in mind, we have to think about what, as I said before, seeding or persuasion. Something you say here in the early stages can have an impact over here in the later stages. If you don't say it, you're bringing that to someone's attention at the point where there's an issue. If you bring it to their attention earlier on, they're much more likely to manage it in their head more sensibly and therefore comply to any suggestions or advice you give them up here rather than reacting to it at this end. So let me give you an example of that. Now, this isn't the exact script I would use. In fact, when we're doing these scripts with operators, what we're trying to do is come up with a script that works for that operator. Now, we do this part after someone's signed their agreement. Now, if they're signed in club, it's much easier to do. If they've signed online, then my suggestion is you make a video in terms of a follow-up that goes with this. So after they signed, we say, everyone that joins thinks they'll maintain regular exercise routine. We understand that not everybody does. Some people just cancel at the bank. That triggers a that triggers a message to our finance team to chase the collection. And sometimes that escalates. So that's the first part of this. So we're talking about what people think will happen. You know, I've joined a gym, I'm going to exercise forever. We know that's not necessarily true. When people make the decision to cancel, sometimes they go straight to the bank and cancel it because they don't want, and they don't inform us as a business. If we highlight these things during the joining phase, once they've joined though, and then say to them, however, 80% of our customers inform us when that time comes. Now we will do everything we can to avoid that happening, and obviously we want to keep you as a customer. But we have a simple process to follow, which will mean that you need to come in and sign the appropriate paperwork, and in that way we can part on good terms. So you're actually telling them about the behavior you want them to perform once they get to the point in their experience with your business that they want to leave. You're showing them the way out. Now they've already joined. You don't want to be encouraging them to quit, which I'll come back to in a second. But you want to say to them, if that time comes, this is the way we do it. When you come in, we get that paperwork signed off. We grab some feedback from you. That helps us understand ways we can improve the business. You get to share with us what your experience was. And as I said before, we leave on good terms. Something that I see happening a lot, and some of you who've seen my presentations before will have heard me say, is when you're selling month-by-month memberships, during the joining phase, before they've signed up, don't emphasize how easy it is to quit while they're joining. Say to them, we have a membership package where you join and you pay each month, and each month you make a payment. Now, if you start saying, if you join this month and you don't like it, you can quit next month. what you're actually encouraging is you're actually doing persuasion and seeding of cancelling early in the membership. So you want to avoid talking to customers about cancelling until they've joined. Once they've signed, then give them this piece of information. Now, those of you that travel will have seen something like this in a hotel room. Nearly all hotels around the world now, of any scale, so not the B&Bs, but the bigger facilities, have little cards in the bathrooms that say, our customers, or the majority of our customers, use their towels for the duration of their stay. If you need your towels changed, drop them into the bath. But what they're telling you is actually the majority of people behave in a certain way. It's called social proof. It's used by Amazon. It's used by all the online booking sites. People who've bought this also bought this. This many people looked at this reservation in the last hour. It's a standard way now digitally of communicating how you want people to behave in the future. So separate the processes. There's the signing phase, there's the getting them to buy phase, and then once they've bought, there's the, okay, there's a possibility in the future that you'll want to leave. We don't want to get in your way of doing that, but we do need you to go through this process. What you'll find is that a lot more people come back to you and say, it's that time, what do I need to do? Now, at that time, you can actually obviously implement some time recovery processes, but the customer is much more likely to engage with you than just cancel at the bank. So the next element I want to talk about is saving members who've inferred they wish to leave in the future. So these are people who've come to us and said, yeah, we want to go either now or in the future. Now, I think there's a few things to just be sensible about. One, don't make the assumption about why they want to leave. Don't throw your toys out the pram. Don't take it personally. Don't make it difficult or deliberately complicated. And don't get disheartened. People come and go within businesses for all sorts of reasons. Sometimes they're not in your control. Sometimes they are. If they're leaving and it's something you could have controlled, try and fix that for the next person. If it's something you can't control for, then you can't control for it. Quite often, some of the triggers for these phases are that people never actually got started. We've done enough research now looking at the gap between joining and first visit to say categorically that the longer that gap is between when they join and when they first visit the club, the more likely they are to quit. The only exception to that is if they join in a pre-opening phase. So if you're pre-selling, that doesn't seem to have an impact because people know that the club isn't open. But if they join on a Monday and they don't visit for 2 weeks, the chances of them staying more than about 8 weeks, very, very slim. So we know that there are early triggers that can warn us about people who are going to quit later on. It may be the end of a trial period. We've got people who are on guest passes. I'm amazed at the number of times businesses are launching guest passes through their marketing teams and through their sales teams, but they're not informing their front of house teams or their fitness teams about these guest passes. So they don't even know who's on a guest pass. People on a guest pass, we know short period, 7 days, 14 days. It's a really good time to try and capture them, but we can also know that they're actually going to trigger them to not come back. So we want to get involved with them as quickly as possible. It could be at the end of the first billing period. We know that seasonal events such as the summer holidays, such as school holidays, very much impact on people's exercise adherence and their routine. And once people get out of the routine of coming to the facilities, their visit frequency declines quite quickly and then we lose them. So we need to be conscious of seasonal factors that can affect retention. So it's not season in terms of weather. It tends to be season more in terms of holidays, national holidays, and our school breaks. And obviously we've got annual rebills or renewals when we're coming up to the end of someone's contract. Now, I work with an operator in Saudi Arabia, and they track not only member visits, but they also track where someone is within their contract, because they recognize that trying to resell a membership for the next 12 months is very difficult if someone stopped coming in after 8 weeks. And because they're selling the vast majority, in fact, all of their memberships up front, so you pay for a whole year in one payment, they have to renew each year. And therefore, tracking when the end of their billing period is very important if you're going to tackle those types of customers, those ones who pay up front for the entire year. Warning signs. Well, often the warning signs that they're looking to quit, well, they tell you. Those of you who measure net promoter score will have seen your net promoter scores change for people who are becoming disassociated with their loyalty and they're pulling back from the club. I think you have to be careful with net promoter score. As much as a fan I am of net promoter, customers who've been customers for longer periods of time will have a very different view of your business than customers who are new to your business. It's a bit like being in a relationship. You know, when you're first dating someone, everything's new, everything's fresh, everything's exciting. If you were to score that relationship, not suggesting you do, but if you were to score that relationship, you'd probably score it quite high in the early stages. But after a few months, maybe a year, maybe a few years, maybe a decade, how you score that relationship would be very different, because actually you have much more time to reflect on what was the experience. You'll have had good experiences, not so good experiences, whereas in a short period of time, you don't get all of that. Obviously, a drop in visit frequency has an impact. We know that visit frequency, if you can keep it around 1 per week or 4 per month, they're more likely to stay. They're not going to get their fitness goals, but they are more likely to stay. We've also been tracking recently email messages not opened or unsubscribed, and noticing that as a warning sign for dropping out of the business. People airing gripes and grievances either directly through your feedback loops, such as Net Promoter Score or customer surveys, or through our social media and blog comments. People will talk about the poor experiences they're having much more now. Some are justified, some are not. What I would do is I would start to classify these reasons, both on social media, through your feedback loops, and when people are leaving, based on, is it an experience failure? Is it a product failure? Is it a service failure? I'd categorize them into groups so they're not just all one type of I didn't enjoy it type piece of information. So one of the things we want to know is who's in their last month. You know, who's in the last month of their contract, because if they've not been in, we may not think about following up. Now, I know some of you auto roll over so that after 12 months, someone has to inform you that they want to cancel. But you want to keep a track on how many people are still using the club, who've moved on to auto payment, auto renewal, and the number of people who are still using the club. You don't want to be sending out information, and I'm sure none of you do, but you don't want to be sending out information telling people to renew who've automatically gone into auto renewal who aren't using the club. Now, I know this is a contentious issue within the fitness industry. We do have dormant members. We have people that pay and don't use. My view on it is we should do everything we can in the first 6 months to help them stay, and after that they have to take responsibility. Not that we ignore them, but the focus becomes we look after them for the first 6 months, and then they've got to start becoming independent exercise and look after themselves after that. So 4 strategies you can deploy when members have given their 1 month's notice. Well, the first one, this is a face-to-face, a verbal approach. We've used this very successfully. It takes, I don't know, guts is the word, but staff have to practice this to make sure that they're comfortable saying it. So one of the things I noticed a number of years ago, I was standing at a club, I was standing at reception, customer came in and they said, I want to cancel. And all that happened was the person on the front of house reached down, took out a form, passed it to them, didn't ask them a question, didn't say anything, just gave them the form, let them fill it out, took it back and said, I'll make sure that gets processed. No attempt to save that customer at all. So I stepped back from that and thought, okay, what processes could we put in? What could we try? So one thing we've tried, and we've had quite a decent success at this, we save 2 out of 10 customers, which is a 20% success rate. Someone comes in and says, I want to cancel. We have to train our staff to look at them and just say, really? Now, the way in which they say really has a massive impact. In fact, you could use the term really about 8 or 9 times just by changing your voice tone to keep a conversation going. But in this instance, what I encourage staff to do is when someone says, I want to cancel, pause, look at them, and then with a curiosity voice, as a voice with surprise in it, just say, really? And then pause. Some customers don't want to cancel, but the only way they can communicate with us that they're upset, unhappy, or want attention is to actually threaten to cancel. Then we tend to get very excited about how we might be able to help them. It's the same again as being in a relationship. Sometimes you're in a relationship and your partner says, that's it, it's over. And it's not that they want the relationship to be over, but it's the only thing they can say that gets your attention. Because it's an ultimate response. It's like, this is it. I'm done. We're finished. The same with the customer. They say to us, I want to cancel. We need to think about how we're going to respond to that. Staff, I'm encouraging staff to say, really? And then they ask, how come? So there's a pause and then they ask, how come? Never ask why. The reason you don't ask why is why always requires a justification. If I ask you why you smoke, you justify it. If I ask you why you train, you justify it. We don't want people justifying behaviours that we don't want them to do. Use plenty of questions that include why when people want to join. Why are you thinking of joining us now? Why did you choose us over anyone else? But not why about negative behaviours. Some of you as managers will have heard me say, never say to your staff that are late, why are you late? Because when they justify it to you, they're also justifying it to themselves. So you ask, how come? How come generates a process response. Now, probably about 50% of the time when you ask how come, the response you'll get is still a why response. But I can guarantee you this, every time you ask a why question, you get a justification. 50% of the time you ask how come, you'll get a justification. 50% of the time, you'll get a process response. So the approach to use when someone says, I want to cancel, respond with, really? Pause, allowing them to think. Allow them to think. When you say really, they'll often go internal, check with themselves whether that's true, and then say, how come? So before they respond, you have to say, how come? I want to cancel? Really? How come? Then, as particularly if you lean in as you say it, you're showing you're paying attention. They'll say, well, and some of them will still want to cancel, but some will go, well, I don't really want to cancel, but I'm not really using it, or I don't like the classes I'm going to, or I don't find that I'm progressing well enough. That's when you need to have your package of solutions of what you're going to offer. Now, I know there's a couple of operators who are on this webinar that I've been working with recently, and they made up some packages and they present those, and they've shown all of their staff, look, this is what we're going to say to people when they say they want to leave. We're going to offer them this, then we're going to offer them this. So they make sure that every member of staff knows. Now, I know there'll be a few of you sitting here going, oh, I know what's going to happen now. Everybody's going to threaten to cancel because they want to try and get this special deal or a free personal training session. I think this is where we have to be mindful about who can give that. So sometimes you'll be able to do that at front of house. Sometimes you'll say, well, look, if you speak to my manager, or if you can speak to our club centre manager, they'll take you through this process and you might be able to recover them then. You may not just want to make this an automatic process, that as soon as someone says, I want to quit, you have a knee-jerk reaction. A second approach is to set up an exit survey. And I know many of you will have done exit surveys, but I'm going to use exit surveys in a slightly different way. Exit surveys have always been a challenge because people just want to leave. They just want to get away. If you've done the seeding process where you said 80% of our customers let us know, we'll take you through the paperwork. You can do a survey then, and you'll often get much more responses or much more responsive answers. You'll get people more likely to tell you the truth. Quite often what happens is people set up exit surveys and they don't follow through. They don't get enough people filling them out, so they don't keep it going. And I would suggest that that's almost like self-perpetuating. If you don't do them, you don't get them. You have to practice getting people to fill out exit surveys. It's not an instant thing that everybody's just going to go, oh yeah, of course I will. But customers are more likely to expect to have to do that if you told them about it in the early stages. Now, what I've got in front of you here is a section of an exit survey from a client that I worked with for a while. Now, you need to be mindful of how you lay this out, how you're going to deliver it. I would always suggest that this has to be filled out by the customer, but don't just hand it to the customer and say, go away and fill that out. They need to do it under supervision. You also have to be mindful of the words that are used. This at the top is just before you go. The company that this originated from, it had one version of it that said, how have we failed you? And then another version that said, we hate to see you leave. And I'm not sure that, so how have we failed you or hate to see you leave is the type of language that I would want to use when I'm trying to build a good relationship with a customer when they're leaving. So be mindful if you're going to do it as a paper form or an online form about the title you might give it. Think about the types of questions. Now, these three questions: did we live up to our promise? Did you reach your joining goals? Did our team help you progress? These are all closed questions. Now, if you want closed question answers, then you need to make sure that they can be yes or no or a single word type answer. But often you're looking for the reasons. And if you're looking for reasons, you want to draw that out. You'll want to be using words like explain, clarify. You want them to actually write a few things down. Now, here, tick which reason best explains your reasons for leaving. I can't come. These are all giving them ammunition to explain, oh, I'll just tick this one. Whereas actually leaving it blank sometimes, but making it a mandatory box they have to fill in will actually get you more information. Question number 2, I'm disappointed with the service and facilities. Problem with this, that's asking 2 questions in one sentence. I could be disappointed with the services. I could be disappointed with the facilities. But if I tick this one, number 2, as an operator, I'm not clear which one of these 2 it is that's causing the problem. Is there anything else we feel? Is there anything else you feel we should know? Is there anything else we can do to change your mind? Net Promoter Score here is a really, really good way of capturing information from people. I love the Net Promoter Score. Obviously 0 to 10. Not sure why some people are using 1 to 10, but it's 0 to 10. 0 to 6 are your detractors. Obviously 7s and 8s are your passives, and 9s and 10s are your promoters. Now, if you're using a form, and this is similar to what you've just seen, and I'm asking over here, how likely is it to recommend a friend or colleague on a scale of 0 to 10? They're leaving. I'm asking this when they're leaving. If they score a 9 or a 10, then I'm going to take advantage of that. Because what I'm going to say, well, tell me things about that you liked about being a member of the club. I'm actually going to get a testimonial from them about them using the club. Now, some of the customers are just going to make up answers for you to make themselves feel good when they're talking to us. So if they give us a 9 or a 10, ask them for a testimonial. Use that testimonial as a promotional tool. I know Holmes Place in Germany, Sean, who was the marketing director at Holmes, we did some work together, and he's got a whole promotional campaign which is just all the 5-star comments that his customers have used who've left. And he just shows them to people. These are the people who've left, and this is what they said about us. Now, the other reason I'd want to do this is if someone gives you a positive testimonial when they're leaving, it actually leaves the door open for them to come back. Because if they change their mind, if their circumstances change, they're much more likely to come back to us because they've said the positive things about us. One, in their own mind, they've said these positive things, but also they've said them to us. So that relationship is much more likely to be rekindled. Once you've done the whole signing off thing, put the paperwork to one side if you're doing it as an interview, and then say, now that that's done, is there anything else we should know? Often when people see that the paperwork is completed and put to one side, and you ask this question, they'll very often give you the true reason why they're leaving. Now, don't suddenly pick the paperwork up and start filling it out. Listen to them, ask them questions, see if you can recover them. Ask them if you actually, do you want me to throw that paperwork away? Find a way to actually entice them back into the business. If they're not to be enticed back in, just log the information, make use of it afterwards. Don't burn your bridges. When someone's left, send them a confirmation message relative to their cancellation. Put it in a positive way. Keep it really light-hearted. Thank them for their business. Just reinforce some positives with them about their experience with your business. Now, you can do this as text. You can do it as a video. I quite like using videos for these now. Now, as soon as they've cancelled, you want to set up an automation that triggers this. Well, let me start again. It's a win-back sequence, but it's content-driven as a win-back sequence. I've got an example here, if I can find it quickly on my phone. Perhaps not today. Sorry, should have prepared this. Was going to turn this into a... No, I haven't got it. But it's a win-back sequence from a low-cost operator, and every message is the same. 24-hour joining. Why don't you rejoin? Join. No building relationships, no trying to understand or keep in touch with me, just sending me sales messages. So an example sequence is let them know they're missed, show them what they've been missing, if you've changed anything. You know, those of you using Body Pump or Les Mills products or services in your studios, every quarter you're changing things, announce that. Show if you've changed anything in the gym, introduce a new member of staff, then maybe give them a special offer, show them what else they've missed before you close down the offer. Give it a time limited period. For me, I would look at a period of about 30 to 90 days, not the first 30 days, but sequence messages within the first 30 days, perhaps 2 or 3, then start building up to making them an offer. You don't want to leave it too long, but you don't want to go too hard. As soon as they left, if you start sending a message about join now, all they're going to do is unsubscribe. If they're not unsubscribed, they're interested in your content. Share content with them, fitness tips, workout of the day, workout of the month, challenges you're doing, but just stay in touch with them. You've got an opportunity to recover them if you stay in touch with them. Hi, Paul Bedford here from Retention Guru, and in this session I want to focus on how quickly are we actually recovering and what can we do to accelerate that process. Now, within this session I want to talk about you looking at your own data. I want you to trust in your own data. There's an awful lot of data and numbers being produced by trade organizations, by operators, and also financial institutions. And I think you need to be mindful that comparing yourself to some of that is not going to be useful. And actually just focusing on what's going on within your business is probably the most important thing you can do right now, rather than trying to compare you to someone else. So typical club groupings of members pre-pandemic, let's say this is 1,000 members. You got your hardcore exercises, your enthusiasts, your regulars, irregulars, and your sleepers. Once the pandemic hit, what we saw was there was an overnight contraction of the business, and you lost probably somewhere between 30 and 40% of your customers. Within that, the way we come up with our descriptions is that we talk about hardcore exercises by visit frequency. Then you've got your enthusiasts. These are the people who are coming at least 3 times a week. Then your regulars, twice per week. Your triers, they're coming once per week, but they're not really getting much further than that. Then you've got your occasionals. They come in not each week, but perhaps 3 times a month or twice a month. And then you've got your sleepers. If you've seen my sessions before, you'll be aware of this at-risk line. We're able to predict that all those people who are below that line are at risk of cancelling. And what we saw at the beginning of the pandemic was a lot of those people just disappeared overnight. Now what we're starting to see is clubs reopening across the world, and they've all got different types of restrictions. Some can open with Group X, some without. Some have to use managed visits, so you have to go by appointment, so you have to book a time and a day and attend at that time and day, otherwise you can't turn up. So there's no point in making these comparisons between each other, because it's just, not every club is like every other club. But I want you to look at the data, and I want you to look at what we've seen generally in this recovery phase. Now what we're seeing is this: once there's a lockdown period, obviously the membership falls away. Now as you look at this chart, what you're seeing, the grey line represents visit frequency of active users. What we saw when we had lockdown was obviously there was no opportunity to visit, so we have this great big hole in our membership data. But once we reopen, what we saw was quite a big bounce back. We saw a lot of people coming in, particularly in the early weeks of reopening, and using it quite frequently. But it wasn't evenly distributed. So you don't get all of your members back all in one go. You get the sort of the hardcore and the enthusiasts. They're back in. They're the ones who are in day one and working out day one. And they'll work out quite frequently after that. For a few weeks. And in fact, they get back into their pattern quite quickly. Then you get the other people who are trying to visit more frequently. And some of those have the opportunity to do that because of their working conditions. But we also notice that tends to drop away after the first 7 weeks. So after 7 weeks, what we're seeing is the numbers pretty much return to pre-pandemic figures. Now, it might be that's the percentage of your members, but remember, your club might have shrunk by 30 to 40% of your customers. So what you're trying to do is you want to try and get as many of your existing customers back into their regular routine as quickly as possible. But the reason I point it out is I don't want you to think that suddenly, with a massive influx and the clubs being busy, that everything's safe now. We are seeing positive recovery, but we need to sort of scaffold that. We need to support that for the long term, not just for a peak period early in what is not officially, but is almost a new year. It's the equivalent of January, February, but at a different time of year. We've also seen a large number of people coming in, joining for the first time. So these are new customers, and they tend to have quite a high visit frequency in the early weeks as well, but then they tend to drop off and down to pre-COVID levels as well. Now, what I would advise is you tackle your members in slightly different ways based on their visit frequency. So let's have a look at that now. So assuming that you had 1,000 members pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, you've got 600 that have returned and 400 that have not returned. Of the 600 that have returned, let's group those into visits and not visiting, or low visit frequency. So the top group, visiting once per week or more. The middle group visiting less than once per week, but they are visiting. Then we've got this odd group that I've put here, which is they're paying but not visiting. So they've clearly indicated their willingness to stay a member, but they're not yet visiting the club. Then I'm going to look at the bottom two group. Those who have not returned, so you've got the frozen, so they've indicated they want to stay members, but they're not yet paying, which is slightly different from the group that was above them. And then you've got the cancelled. And for the time being, I wouldn't worry about the cancelled. I would suggest if you take these 5 groups, you're going to work on just 3 specific areas. First, I would start with these, visiting less than once per week but are visiting. Then I would tackle the paying but not visiting. You know, they're paying, I want them in. I don't want them to drop below that line. I want them in, I want them using the club, and I'm going to give you some tactics for that. And then I would focus on the frozen, and I would tackle them in that order. I think you're going to have the biggest results, you're going to have the fastest bounce back if you tackle those 3 groups in that order rather than trying to tackle your entire data set. Tips and tactics for increasing visit frequency, particularly around those groups. What we have seen is that the 18 to 34-year-olds, when we break them out as a group, they're coming back in response to challenges. You know, if you set them a burpees challenge or a distance challenge or some sort of activity that they can set themselves up as a goal or something they can do as a group, they're going to return and they're going to participate in those types of activities. Then you might want to think about group exercises. Now, obviously, with some countries, people are under restrictions, so it's more difficult to get more people in. But you really do want to promote your group exercise program and find ways of maximizing attendance. And then you also want to introduce them to new activities. Show them the new things you've got. If you're fortunate to live in a region in the world where you've got outside areas now to exercise in, bring them in. This is the sort of thing that's going to be really attractive to them. Then what we do is we'll look at the 35 to 54-year-old. They've come back in their droves. These people have seemed to be quite comfortable coming back in. But they need focus. And there is some anxiety around how long clubs are going to be open. You know, there's always this talk of, are we going to be shut down again? Are we going to be shut down? So when you're focusing on this group, you want to give them recognition for their behaviour. Recognise they've been coming in. Get them to re-establish their goals. What are their goals post-pandemic? Have they changed? Check back in with them. You know, see if there's a group of people all trying to get to the same place. A lot of people now are saying actually they're focusing more on health than they were on fitness. Find ways of communicating that with them. And perhaps just give them 3-month targets. Don't give them 6-month, 12-month, 18-month, long-term goals. Give them shorter, intermediate and medium-term goals to focus on. The final group you want to tackle is the over 55s. Get testimonials. Particularly try and get video testimonials about their joy about being back in the club, what they missed about being back in the club. To also employ, you know, we're using a tactic from sales, which was be a friend, bring a friend, which has traditionally been used as a referral program. And we're recommending you try be a friend, bring a friend back. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to get existing customers to get their friends who are members who are either visiting less frequently, are not visiting at all, or are frozen to come back and use the club. If you can, turn those people into a news story. The press seem to love images and pictures of older adults exercising and getting on with things, particularly if you've got video of your 81-year-old mum doing chin-ups or someone deadlifting who doesn't look like someone who would normally deadlift. Turn those into news stories, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to reassure people that, you know, it's safe to get back in and train again. And you want lots of pictures of people, lots of smiley faces, and lots of positive comments.